This conference will now be recorded.
All right, fantastic. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm going to call this Planning Commission public meeting to order at 7:02 p.m. on April 15th. It's the role of the Planning Commission to hold workshops to review and make recommendations to the City Council on all manner of policy and legislative activities. In some cases, we act as a quasi-judicial board for land use cases, which can then be appealed to either the council, the hearing examiner, or a court. Tonight, the Planning Commission is held as a conference call to comply with the governor's stay home, stay healthy orders. We will be following the same procedures that we use for our meetings when we're all at council chambers. There will be two opportunities for public comment tonight, one at the beginning for items that aren't on the agenda, and then again following staff presentation for our workshop. Please put your microphone or telephone on mute during the meeting to help with audio quality. As you heard, this meeting will be recorded. On our agenda, we have call to order, citizen communications for items not on the agenda, agenda approval, consent items, we have a workshop, staff reports, and then we're all done. So, Janice, could you take roll?
Absolutely. Brian Matson.
Here.
Jason Lugo.
Here.
Sam Nigro.
Here.
Tiffany Witten. Absent. Tel Jensen.
Here.
Thank you.
All right. Sorry, what's going on with my setting? All right, moving on. So, citizen communications not on the agenda. I have a hunch we're going to be pretty light on that, but just to do everything by the book, are there any citizen communications for items not on the agenda? I think, you know, if we see anybody else join later, I'll ask again. But since I don't see anybody else on, I'm going to move on to agenda approval. So, could I get a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Who was that? Was that you, Brian? Oh, that was Sam. All right. Thank you, Sam. How about a second?
Second.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Any questions about the agenda? No? Okay, take a vote then. All those opposed to approving the agenda? Nobody's opposed, so the motion carries. Moving on to consent items. That is our approving minutes from the March meeting. And I will need a motion for that as well.
I motion that we approve minutes.
Second.
Okay. All right. Motion's been made and seconded to approve the minutes from our March 18th meeting. Anybody find any problems with those? Any discussion about that? Look good to me. All right. Great. Let's take a vote then. All those opposed to approving the minutes? No one's opposed, so the motion carries. Moving right along to our discussion workshop for the evening. This is Housing Action Plan and Retooling Our Code. ZTA-20-004 and SEP-20-012. I presume there is at least one staff presentation. Oh, you're muted, Travis.
Okay.
All right.
Let's see if I can get this to the right screen. Okay, look good. Everybody can see that?
I can.
All right. So I apologize that I was on vacation last week and I spent a busy day trying to send out notice. And I unfortunately, instead of putting April 15th on the public notice, I put May 15th on the public notice. So instead of having a public hearing tonight, we are having a workshop. So what it means is a lot of the stuff I had prepared or planned to do, I drew back a little bit, and instead of preparing an ordinance for you to discuss tonight, I'm going to do a quick summary of our December presentation on affordability, and then I'll dive into the individual code sections that I was hoping that we would discuss and fix. And if we can hammer out a lot of the issues today, or if you don't have any significant changes to what's there, I can streamline the presentation on next month, and we can just talk about the ordinance and streamline the hearing next month. So I will go through and do a little bit of background discussion and then hopefully get to some of the text discussion before we're done here today. So again, in summary, for the citizens who might end up watching this video, we are talking about, or we are working on a grant from the state of Washington Department of Commerce associated with House Bill 1923. And the purpose of this bill is to increase urban residential building capacity, and specifically to pursue residential building capacity and housing affordability projects, code changes, and projects, which is what we're here to talk about today. It includes a large list of potential opportunities or tools that communities are supposed to look at, and the ones in red are the ones that we will be able to, in the left column, the ones that we will be able to address through our code with relatively minor changes to the code. And what I initially thought would be 8 changes, I rolled a couple of them together because we can address them through a single minor code change. And so we'll actually be looking at 6 topics today. So again, when we talk about affordable housing, affordable is considered to be 30% of a household's income, and that's supposed to include utilities. And when we talk about the community or the households, it's generally considered that renters are estimated to have 60% of the community's median income, and owners are estimated to be 80% of the community's median income. So what that means for Woodland is our median income is, for the city of Woodland, is $49,944, and a mortgage payment expectation for owners would be about $1,249 a month if you make that median income of $49,944. Low income is considered 80%, and they can afford about $999 a month, and that's including utilities. Again, keep reminding that. Very low income, that's 50% of the median income, and that's $624 a month in rent and utilities. And extreme low is 30% of the median income. That's about $15,000 of income a year, and they can afford to spend about $375 a month on mortgage and utilities. So that's for owners. Renters are generally considered to, like I say, make about 20% less. And so the median income for renters is about $37,500. They can afford to pay rent of $936. Low income, very low income, and extremely low income. That's what this slide shows. And so an extremely low income renter in our community can afford about $281 for their rent and utilities. So that gives you an idea of what's considered affordable rent for housing in this community. What makes housing so expensive? This is one of my favorite slides that we've talked about previously. Changes in house side. In 1950, the average house was about 983 square feet. There were 3.8 people living in it, and that's about 292 square feet per person. Fast forward to 2012, the average house size is 2,771 square feet, with only 2.5 people living in that household, which means that the average person has about 1,012 square feet per person in households these days. Yeah, and then bearing in mind that Woodland has, I think it was 8 times the average square foot per person for storage when we talked about our mini storage moratorium. So not only do we have 1,000 square feet per person, we probably have about 150 square feet per resident in storage space. So it's quite glaring. So what makes housing so expensive? Well, part of it is we have proximity to other communities. Woodland's median income is $49,994. Clark County is about 80,000, Ridgefield 103,000, La Center 91,000, Vancouver 61,000, Kalama 57,000, and Cowlitz seems to be the only lower average median income, and that's 47,000. So part of it is we're experiencing a lot of more affluent communities around us. So if you can't afford in those jurisdictions, you might tend to come to Woodland when there's an opportunity available because it's cheaper here than it might be in those jurisdictions. The other thing that's causing housing issues here is our construction trends. What you see here is the last 6 years of construction activity. 2016, we had 53 units, 54 units in 2017. 2018 goes down by half to 27. 2019, we had 24 units. Last year, we had a total of 7 units. And so far this year, we've added 3. So our building activity for residential structures has kind of dropped off a cliff. So on the supply side, Woodland is not keeping up with its current pressure, let alone that expense pressure for larger and larger structures. We're now getting less and less selection on the market. So again, that gets us back to the State House bill. The city has already identified some housing issues that we wanted to address, and it includes those ones in red that we had looked at and thought about discussing before. It was already on our Retooling Our Code list. So luckily, this was already on our radar. So I'm going to talk about the specific ones on that list that I think we can tackle relatively quickly. And I also have to say that some of these you might be disappointed with the opportunity for us to get the public involved in them because of COVID-19 and the restrictions that are going on. We recognize that. So we are looking at changes that shouldn't have significant impacts on neighborhoods as a way to get some of these tools in our toolbox, but not necessarily causing the seismic shifts of changes in our existing neighborhood. So we're trying to keep that in mind and balance that. So the first change I think we can tackle, you have a little staff reportlet attached to the agenda that hopefully you've had a chance to look at for last meeting or this meeting. The first option is to change our short plat process to 9 lots. Our code currently allows 4 lots through the short plat process. And by changing 5 words, we can make our short plats 9 lots instead of 4. That means that we will be able to reduce the processing time by approximately 30 to 60 days. It'll reduce costs by several $1,000s for applicants. And these changes will not affect other changes in the code, and it in itself will not have any changes to density or neighborhood character, but it is a process and a bureaucratic efficiency. The one thing that I did note is that we can change our SEPA exemption threshold from 4 to 9 as well, which means that if an applicant is creating 9 lots or less, they would not have to go through the SEPA process. And I only realized that when I was preparing this presentation. So when I said we only need to change 5 words, and those 5 words are 4, and we're changing them to 9. And so it's relatively quick change. Does anybody have any comments or questions about this before I move on?
Hey, Travis, this is Brian Matson. Are you by chance at the city or at the Scott Street offices?
Yes, I am at the council chambers.
Okay, I'm outside and I'm locked out, by the way.
Oh.
I've been listening on the phone. I just drove over so I could see what
Okay.
they're doing.
Okay, I'll wait for Brian to get back in. I have a couple thoughts. Nothing too serious.
Oh,
I guess I can cut that.
so you want to come use my computer screens just so you can see? Oh, sure. Sorry, the one day I didn't set up the screen because in the last year I haven't had anybody in here with me. So I'll fix that maybe if we take a break here in a couple minutes.
No worries.
Okay.
So, any comments?
Yeah, is there anything, so nine's the maximum we can do on here. Is there, I always kind of try to err on the side of, small is beautiful in these cases. And I think, adjusting it a little bit makes sense. I'm not sure that going all the way up to 9 would be necessary. I mean, do we have to, is it 9 or nothing, or is it, we can go anywhere from where we're at up to 9?
Yeah, you literally could go anywhere. You could even go down to 2 if you wanted to.
Okay.
Just
I don't think we need to go down.
just to let you know, Calais County is also looking at increasing that threshold to 9 for short plats. So
It seems like a pretty efficient to reduce bureaucracy.
Yeah, and that seems good. I just, I wonder if the difference between like a small development is maybe somewhere between 4 and 9. I'm not necessarily at either end, but I don't think 9's like so far out of what I'm comfortable with that I would be opposed to it. It just seems like it's sort of starting to get up there where it's, maybe not just a regular Joe doing that. That's somebody with some, some capital behind them, and they are equipped to handle our bureaucracy. Whereas the small developers really aren't.
So, Tel, I had something I wanted to offer on that. I certainly don't have a problem with 9 being the threshold for a short plat, but I know that Clark County already has 9 for their urban areas. But one thing I do think, when you're looking at like a small residential street, 9 lots is a considerable impact. I just want that, I want the notification to be the same as like a subdivision. I don't know, I didn't look this up, but in the Clark County, if it's a subdivision, they have to post a sign at the site, and a lot of people see that sign. Some people don't open up all their mail or they toss it. I think, I would like to offer that that's fine to short plat up to 9 lots, but to still have the requirement that they post a sign, just because I think the notification is the key. As long as people have input, I certainly don't think that a short plat needs to go to any kind of hearing per se. It could be an administrative deal. I just think that the notification should be similar to a subdivision so that, the people have a better opportunity or they're more aware of it for making comments.
That's a really good point, because Melissa and I just realized in our code that type 2 applications are not required to be mailed to neighbors within 300 feet.
They're not?
They're not.
Oh,
So we are required to post on site, and we are required to post at City Hall and the post office, but not to mail to the neighbors. So maybe the answer is we increase the number, but we add more traditional notification methods like posting 2 signs on site. I think Clark County requires 1 on site plus 1 in the neighborhood approaching the property.
I don't know if they require. I've only seen 1, but I don't remember seeing that. But it wouldn't be the first time. It's something that's been in the code that I wasn't aware of.
So that's something that I could easily add to the code if that seems like it makes sense. I know Commissioner Nigro will tell you that we definitely do not adequately notice the neighbors.
No, we're talking about the Belmont Loop issue.
Yeah.
I think notification is key for lessening the bureaucracy. I think I'm fine for that. I just want to make sure that the notification is good. Because you still have,
I agree, because that's,
they'll submit everything unless they don't know about it.
that's, 9 lots could mean a big difference to a neighborhood for sure. And
Okay, so I will add that.
Great.
Any other comments? Okay, so the next one is one that we talked about last time, and currently duplexes are require a conditional use permit. And I went through our code with a fine-tooth comb, and the conditional use permit requires a public hearing before the hearings examiner. It adds several thousands of dollars plus up to a 2-month delay in the process. But it doesn't necessarily add a significant amount of value for essentially what equates to 1 extra dwelling unit. And so staff suggestion or the staff report that you have includes language that would allow for duplexes to be permitted on corner lots if 1 driveway approaches each street so that it appears to be a single family residence from each street that it fronts. And corner lots can better accommodate this because corner lots are already required to have 2 front yard setbacks, 1 from each frontage. And so they already tend to be larger just by having the building footprint. So this actually would reward an applicant for properly planning for density. And lots that are not corner lots would still require a conditional use permit. And this would seem to kind of address the existing neighborhood loophole where if you have single family residentials and relatively small lots, you would have to go through the conditional use permit process. And one of those criteria is that it's in character with the existing neighborhood. So you have to justify the design, the size, the bulk of that structure is consistent with the neighborhood. So on non-corner lots, it still keeps conditional use permits, but in bigger lots, it would make them a permitted use instead of a conditional use.
I certainly think conditional use is overkill for that. But you say that they have to demonstrate that they fit in with a neighborhood. Whenever I have code stuff like that at my real job, it's really hard because the neighbor never thinks it fits in. And if there's not any kind of real metric to hold that to, how do you know it fits in or not? Because you think it might fit in, but the neighbor doesn't. What do you do? I'm a land use planner. Fucking. No.
Yeah.
It's just something I butt up against, and without some sort of actual metric, with the more vague it is, the more people don't, not going to agree.
Yeah. And the benefit of requiring a conditional use permit is the first part of that process is the applicant and the staff review it and they hammer out a recommendation and it goes to the hearings examiner. So there's a independent third party that essentially has to weigh in and has to weigh not only the applicant and the staff's opinion, but they bring in the community's opinion. And it gives the neighbors a little more leverage in trying to negotiate some compromises from the applicants. So that's why I'm recommending that the conditional use permit for the internal lots, the mid-block lots, should stay in place. And this is the example I showed you last month where I have a couple pictures here where these structures have these lots have duplexes. You see the red truck on the left, and then you also see the gray cars on the right. So that is a duplex, but you might not necessarily see that when you first look at this picture. And then the next example is this one here, where the gray car here is parked in front of this unit, and back here in the background you can see another silver car and it's parked at the other unit. So with proper design criteria, the corner lots can be less of an impact. Now we could also, in addition to just changing them to permitted, when we get to the accessory dwelling use section, the existing dwelling use code requires that accessory dwelling units be in similar character, have the same roof line, have the same siding and windows as the primary structure. So if you are so inclined after that discussion, you can talk to me about adding corner lots with similar roof lines and similar designs for both units and painting schemes. So you can add some architectural sideboards on that if you were so inclined to do that. Make sense?
I'm not convinced that a driveway on each street is really necessary. I think it's fine, but I don't know that we need to require that. I'm not sure that to me, that doesn't seem like it would make that much of a difference to the appearance of the thing. And that just seems like, it might not be that big a deal, but that just seems like, one extra hurdle that might not fit in every situation where a duplex would be appropriate. So I don't know if there's, obviously other folks might have a different opinion about that, but I kind of feel like that's a bit.
So, Cal, I know that the engineering folks don't want driveways really close to the corner on a corner lot, and so they may push those driveways to be on each frontage just to get them away from the actual corner for safety. I mean, I'm fine with not making it a requirement, but I think that if you do have a driveway going to each street, it certainly fits in better with other single-family residences as far as the look. But I'm with you. I don't think it has to be a requirement.
Yeah, and I don't.
Tell maybe it doesn't have to be a requirement. We own several duplexes, and I wish mine were on a corner lot like this because what we end up having is shared driveways in the center, and it just it definitely looks multifamily, whereas this you really can't tell. If I had my preference as an owner, I would have something like this. Yeah. More attractive.
I can just imagine, like it's a lot, even if it's on a corner, if it's a little, long or narrow, there might not be room for a driveway on one corner, and so, you know, we're constraining that property in, you know, in what seems like an unnecessary way to me. But, you know, and in practice, it may turn out that everybody who wants to build a corner duplex wants to put the driveways on, you know, the opposite street. But I don't know. It just seems.
So I think the way I have the code written, if they wanted both driveways off of the same street, it would go back to requiring a conditional use permit, maybe. And you bring up a good point, and my gut reaction to the comments is because of the floodplain constraints here in Woodland, we already tend to get a lot of garage doors that dominate street level. And when you look at this one, for example, you have two garage doors, but we've spread them out over different directions as opposed to having them next to each other. So they still dominate the structure, but not like they would, you know, the new units that we've been seeing on Loose River Road. There have been a couple new constructions and a couple new houses built on Gun Club, and they are literally 98% garage door, and the house is 2 floors above the garage. And without having this separate direction, you might end up with, you know, 60 feet of garage and a person door,
Yeah, and
on either side.
I mean, there are other options for addressing
Person
that,
door.
you know, especially if we're talking about new construction. You know, if we don't like that, we can just say you can't, and then say if you want, you know, if you need the garage there that's going to be that wide, then you can build a rear loaded development. So, you know, I think I agree, like that's not fun to look at, but I think there are maybe other tools that might be better for avoiding that. Just saying, you know, you can't have the garage be more than a certain percentage of the frontage. Like that to me sounds like a better solution than saying, I don't know, maybe I'm all wet, but that's just. Anyway, we can talk about this more a little later.
I think you'd have to condition that 60% garage door thing to areas that aren't in the floodplain, because like Travis brought up, if you're in a floodplain area, the feds won't let you build on the ground level. You have to, that's why they put the garages on the bottom, because they have to be 1 foot above that base flood elevation. So they're pretty much forced to do that in those situations. If we put a 60% limitation on the garage door, that would make the design more difficult than it would need to be, I guess, in those situations.
So the floodplain code allows you to do 3 activities within the floodplain, and they are parking, storage, and access. So if you're familiar with the townhomes on Sequoia, they essentially have garage doors, and then they have a stairway off to the side of it that leads you up to the unit. So that stairway is the access, and the garage is parking and storage. But that's kind of why those ended up the way they are. And in a townhome, it doesn't look all that strange, but there's a couple single family residential units that have been built in the last couple years on Lewis River Road, State Route 503, and they look like they're just giant garage doors with an apartment parked on top of it. So, and the one thing I wanted to point out with this picture is the driveway in the foreground is much closer to the intersection, because the direction of travel in that lane is coming from right to left. And if they're taking a right-hand turn, they will be able to see vehicles pulling out of that driveway. Whereas the unit on the left, which is down the street, it has a larger separation. So that way people coming around that corner have a longer distance to spot somebody pulling out of that sidewalk, so, or out of that driveway. So there are design considerations that will help us with driveway spacing, but only on corner lots. Ready for the next one?
Yeah.
Okay, so the next one I'd previously presented to you as diverse housing types and zoning diversity. I thought they were really kind of two distinct separate issues, but they really can be combined into one solution for both of them. And this code, or the goal of this is to try to encourage codes to allow for duplex, triplex, quadplex, sixplex, stacked flat, townhomes, courtyards, apartments, that kind of missing middle housing stock that we don't currently have in our code. And this is a little funky because when you actually look at our code, and I created this this spreadsheet based upon that, and on the left you see the different types of housing that is allowed, and then P is permitted, conditional use permit, hearings examiner, or accessory to the existing units. And these four, the first four columns are our single family residential, low density residential zoning districts. Oh, sorry. And then the last two columns are the multifamily zones. And what going through this exercise show me is we actually allow for a large variety of housing types, but we then throw up all these hurdles and disincentives to actually do anything except for single family residential. And so in other words, there's no incentive to actually achieve density or to add a variety of housing products, which is what this bill is trying to achieve. In fact, as far as I can tell, our code actually has cost and time delay disincentives to anybody who builds anything other than single family residential, which is the most expensive and wasteful of the housing techniques theoretically that we're talking about here. So what I figured is we have the tool called the planned unit residential development process, and we can actually make some improvements to turn those disincentives into incentives. And specifically, the PURD is an existing process, and it's point-based, and it provides flexibility in return for improved design considerations. And we have two types of PURDs. A basic PURD requires 39 points, and an advanced PURD requires 69 points. So there's a big gap between those two points. And unfortunately, we have had no advanced PURDs since the ordinance was passed in 2011. So nobody has seen a reason to actually try and score those extra points. And for example, the last PURD that you reviewed, I believe, was the Woodland Creek, and it was a basic PURD. If you're familiar with that case, it's north end of town behind the intermediate school. And it's 150 units on about 49 acres, and it is all single family residential. They used the flexible street standard, so they got skinny streets and fire lane. They are looking at the flexible lot size, but only because they needed a couple skinny streets. And they had critical area open space, but they didn't qualify for, or they didn't use any density transfer. And so by the time they were done with this tool to encourage density and creative design, they ended up with a density of about 3.4 units per net acre, and our goal is 6. So here is an example of ultra low density sprawl, or I shouldn't say that, low density, what could be considered sprawl. And they are using our best tool to try and encourage density and creative design. So I think we can make some changes to this because it's existing code and it requires very few tweaks. One of the things that I'm recommending is that we add the additional housing types as an allowed use in a planned unit residential development. So if somebody wanted to throw a cottage house or a courtyard design for a few units into a planned unit residential development proposal, that they should be able to do that as an allowed use. And the PURD code actually is specifically designed to encourage variety, and the disincentive is that all we're getting is lower density residential than you would get through a regular subdivision. And the PURD already has density limits built in. Plus, one of the requirements for the PURD is that it has to be in character with the neighborhood. So they would also have to have justification for their design, and if they're including a variety of housing, that they can argue that, or the neighbors can argue that it needs to be designed consistent with existing character. So it seems like a logical way for us to try and make this tool an incentive rather than a disincentive. And it'll help them qualify for advanced PURDs.
Hey, Travis,
Yes.
this is a dumb question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway.
Sure.
I'm not familiar with stacked flat. Is that just the part, like apartments? Or is that what
Yes. So
So is there a height limit on those within a PURD? Is that the big complaint?
so there would, the zoning district would, the regular height limits would apply to a PURD. And when I think of this, I think of the green apartments at the corner of where the library is going in, at Buckeye, Gorig, Davidson, and Lakeshore. So right as you get off exit 22, or sorry, exit 21 on the west side of exit 21, you'll see some apartments, green apartments, 2-story flats is what those are.
Okay. Is your height measured to the peak or to the midpoint of the roof?
Midpoint of the roof.
I just, if you were putting a PURD development surrounded by single family, that's going to be the big, complaint, I think, if you had something that towered over people.
Yes.
Right, I mean, that would be the complaint I would get.
Yes, so the bulk of the structure is definitely something that would have to be weighed for the PURD.
Propose that in the middle of the development and have single family around it.
Exactly, or up to the open space rather than facing the open space with the back to the neighbors.
I like it.
So the other, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just like I like the I like those. I really like these different housing types, and I think including them in the PURD code is great. But it seems like it seems like any PURD development at this point seems likely to, so our minimum size is 2 acres, right? For a PURD. That means it's going to be at the edge of town. And I'm not sure that's like, I think it's fine to have, denser development than we've got at the edge of town. But I think it makes, where I see the real kind of power of these housing types is in the middle of town, in the existing neighborhoods, and as infill tools. And I imagine that's a little trickier and maybe is going to take a little more effort, and maybe we can't do that at this point. Or at least, we won't get it done under the limit here. But I guess I would say, I'm fine putting it in the PURD code. That's fine. But I don't think we should stop there, because I think it really makes the most sense in existing neighborhoods. Just for, because it's using existing infrastructure, it's not, going to increase traffic quite as much because people are already in the middle. And it improves walkability in the already, close to walkable parts of town. That's my main thought there. And, can we, I guess, in addition to these, can we add to the PERD that, if the PERD code, if the goal of it was to, at least one goal was to encourage more density, I mean, couldn't we just put a minimum density number in there, even for a basic PERD?
So, and that transitions to the next issue. So one of the things I'm also recommending, and that is that we add some minimum minimum densities to a couple zones, and those are our multifamily zones, because currently we have high or density maximums of 25 or 35 units per acre, but we have no minimum. So someone could come into our single family or our multifamily district and build single family residential and consume all that multifamily land without building the intended type of structure. And that's because there's no minimum density required.
So what you're saying is you're way ahead of me. And even if that individual proposal doesn't address it, then the whole package. Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks, sir.
Yep.
Makes the zoning and multifamily pointless.
Yes. Especially.
So
if, Go ahead.
Sorry, go on.
So
I was thinking, if this one's, we got 25 and 35. If our goal is not like 6 acres for any particular or 6 units per acre, it's like for the whole city, right? Like we want that to be our citywide number is 6 net units per acre. So I wonder if maybe, if we've got some high residential, like high density residential, I think that should probably be a bigger number than what we're using for, medium density. And just based on the maximum density, if it's 6, if we do 6 for medium MDR, maybe 8.4 for HDR. I mean, that seems like that would get us further toward our.
And this is a slide that I threw in there to address that exact issue that you were talking about, Tel. These are our existing single family zones. The LDR stands for low density residential, and the 6 is 6,000 square feet. The 7.2 is 7,200 square feet, 8,500 square feet, and 10,000. Now, oddly enough, we have a zoning for 10,000 square foot lots, but there's none of it on the zoning map. So we don't have to deal with that really. But the units per acre without dedications for utilities or right of way, the density is shown here. So it's between essentially 4.3 and 7.1. But when you dedicate for right of way for a subdivision, even at 20%, and most developers will tell you that that's low. In residential developments, it's going to be a lot higher than that. But our net density is between 3.5 units per acre and 5.8. So our comp plan does have a 6 unit per acre goal, and even our most dense, low density residential isn't close to getting, well, I guess you could say it's close, but doesn't meet that target that we're looking for. And since we haven't had any multifamily development in at least 6 years, you can pretty much guarantee that we're not meeting our comprehensive plan goal for density. So,
so I got a question about that 80% number again. Like, can we? I mean, we could regulate that number, couldn't we? Couldn't we say, 80% is the minimum? I mean, couldn't we say, you know, if you're building the development, like 20% is all you get for streets.
Yeah. Well,
or 15%.
And that's just a rule of thumb that planners, or at least that I've used in the past, because realistically, like the planned unit residential development, that's the Woodland Creek one that we just talked about, it has a ton of open space, so they have a much smaller net number because that's not dedicated. Whereas you get some of these smaller infill projects, it might be more than 20%. So that was just an estimate for these calculations.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm just saying, you know, we can, like, if they're saying that residential is typically, you know, residential development typically consumes more than 20% per street, I think we can say, well, that might be typical, but we don't have space for that anymore, so it's not going to be typical here.
Is the goal lines, are those based in net density, or they are? So you've got competing interests for the density, and the area makes it can't be density, right? So they can compete with each other.
Yep. Yep. So we have the stated goals, we have the stated policies, we have the tools, but the tools don't actually achieve either the policy or the goal. In effect, even in practice, but just the effect of the regulations don't meet that. So the other thing I wanted to point out, and that is in the staff reports, I'm also recommending that we add that 6 units per acre minimum for planned unit residential developments. And the example that I was bringing up where they have 3.2, 3.4 units per net acre. So they're getting all the benefits of doing a planned unit residential development, the skinny streets, the flexible lot sizes, the flexible lot widths, the being able to use joint driveways, the fire lane for the odd shape of the lot. Yet the city doesn't get the benefit of the higher density, the more utility payers, the cheaper utility benefits that come with higher density. So in a sense, they're getting all the benefits without having to pay any of the costs associated with that. So that's part of the disincentive. Well, it's incentive for them, but the city is not necessarily reaping the benefits for giving away those incentives.
Does lot averaging get you there, or do you just need to make smaller lot?
Okay.
More minimum lot.
So that is a great point, because this next slide is talking about lot averaging. Our code specifically has this standard, and that is in the LDR 5 or LDR 6, 6,000 square foot lots, 5% of your lots can be below the minimum lot size, 10% in the 7.2 and the 20% in the 8.5. And since the majority of our property that is vacant is in the LDR 6, in my staff report, I actually worked the numbers out, and unless it is a 126 acre subdivision, you would not get a averaged lot size. You would not add one additional lot for density. Now, you might be able to squeeze on an average block, you might be able to squeeze in a smaller lot to make up for the size of the length of the block, but you wouldn't actually get any extra density with the tool that we have in place, simply because 5%, that's 1 out of every 40 lots, can be smaller than the minimum lot size. So considering that 39% of them are at or larger, you would not be able to average.
I've hung up on the word average, thinking that you're averaging all the lots, which you're not actually doing. You're just allowing a certain percentage to be in. Okay, I'm with you.
So does that make sense? if only 5% of your lots can be smaller than the minimum lot size, you're not really averaging much. Oh, sorry, so this gets to that. So you would not be able to statistically find a significant benefit to doing any kind of averaging, and there's virtually no density benefit whatsoever the way our code is currently written.
What if it was like zone wide? What if it was, you know, sort of independent of an individual, you know, development? Like, so say I've got a lot that's 10,000 square feet, and I just want to split it into two. But, you know, the rest of, like, our average in all our zones is already like way above our minimum, right? So,
Yeah, so that is a good question, because really what you're talking about is transferable development rights, and that you might be able to borrow or buy a neighbor's development capacity. But I think probably the more effective tool for getting there would be accessory dwelling units, because rather than borrowing your neighbor's density, I would like to see a tool that helps people achieve their own density. And accessory dwelling units, which is probably the last conversation we're going to have here tonight, I think that's probably the better tool, because it doesn't require you to buy or sell or work with your neighbors.
well, I mean, it still could be the difference between, you know, it could be the difference between 2 units and 4 units on, you know, this hypothetical 10,000 square foot lot, right? Like, if I have, you know, if I can split that up and put 2, you know, an ADU on each, I mean, it is, you're right, it's another kind of labyrinthine process, but anyway, something to think about, I guess.
Okay. And so in reviewing this before the hearing, there was one other thing that I had prepared a staff report, but I didn't include my presentation, and that is there is a SEPA exemption for infill and mixed use development, and the staff report was made available for the agenda here tonight. And it expands the opportunity for some infill residential and multifamily, or sorry, mixed use commercial to not have to go through the SEPA process when they go through the site plan. So that's also in your staff reports today. So I apologize for not having the presentation ready for that, but it's a process improvement. It will not affect density, and it will not affect neighborhood character. It's only a code process improvement.
So on that SEPA exemption, so the state stuff on that SEPA would still apply. Over a certain many residential units still triggers SEPA, no matter if it's a mixed use or not, right?
Yes.
If it complies with something that requires SEPA, it has to go through it.
Yes, and actually, if you look at the staff report, I think I propose language that includes the state RCW language. Instead of adopting it by reference, I attached a language. And then I think I proposed 3 new definitions, and that is mixed use commercial, infill commercial, and infill residential. Just so if we're going to start using that term, we need a simple definition that we can kind of refer to and people understand what it is.
I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but what do you envision an infill commercial would look like? Is that just residential units above or something? Is that what you're thinking, or is this like commercial units put in between other commercial units? Or
I could see building in with now a parking lot, putting more, you know, a better use of you know, low density commercial development. That seems like infill to me.
the businesses have parking requirements per use, right? I mean, when people develop commercial stuff, you usually don't leave a lot of extra space around, unless you're a Walmart.
I don't know. We had a couple developments that went way over our parking minimum. So it happened.
So for so the infill development, or sorry, so for mixed use development, the definition that I proposed, and this is directly out of the staff report, and that is mixed use means a development with both a commercial and residential component in the same building or on the same site. So it's open-ended. And the one question I have, and that is, are you comfortable with building and site? Or do you think it should be mixed use building? Or are you okay with a mixed use site?
I'm okay with
I
it.
think the or there is fine.
I don't think that you should put some sort of minimum or maximum percentage on one or the other. Because you don't want to take a commercial piece of property that they can do mixed use on and have them do 14 apartment buildings and then have a little subway in one of the buildings and say, see, it's mixed, right?
And
I've just seen.
I don't know. That doesn't seem so bad to me. That
And
seems all right.
this is the issue that was brought up with the Kirkland Senior Living, and that is what do you draw the line between commercial and residential, right? You know it when you see it. So the definition that I recommend for commercial infill development is as follows. Infill for commercial projects means development where current density and intensity of use in the area is roughly equal to or lower than called for in the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan. So for example, on the commercial side, if you think of the Red Leaf Coffee on Gorig Street, and they are built at the front of the lot and the entire back half of that lot, it looks like it's part of the grass field that faces I-5, but it's not. So to me, that is that would be a perfect infill location for additional commercial development. On the residential side, I think you can drive, there's a lot of properties in town where they have a big yard and a small house in the front. And the definition for residential infill is this, and that is infill for residential projects means the development of a vacant or underutilized site in a manner where current density is roughly equal to or lower than called for in the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan. So if it currently has less than a density of 6 units per acre, it could be a residential infill property, which means ADUs, duplexes, those would all be potential applications without having to do a SEPA checklist. And that's all we're talking about here. We're not talking about any changes to the code itself, just whether or not they need an environmental checklist review.
You still have your own, you still have wetland and habitat and stuff. That'll all still apply. It's just the sequence.
Okay, so the last thing that I wanted to talk about tonight, and this will be more of a embarrassing pulling back the curtain, but opening the discussion for what you want to talk about for accessory dwelling units. So I will try and go through a summary and stop me if you have questions. Otherwise, you can talk about the pros and cons of each one after I'm done. So accessory dwelling units. They are authorized, they are currently allowed accessory uses in all single family zones, and accessory dwelling unit section, it does need to be revised because it's out of date, and it was already on our retooling our code list to be fixed. So I'm going to go through those standards real quick, and there's not necessarily a lot of logic to how this is written because it follows the code, and there's not a lot of logic in the code. So You are allowed to have one accessory dwelling unit in each lot with a single family residential structure. So this would not apply to multifamily lots unless there was a single family structure on them. Our code says that the owner has to occupy one of the units, and it goes on to specifically say that the owner has to occupy the primary structure for at least 6 months of the year. So the difficulty I have with that is I can't necessarily prove or enforce whether they own it or not, and whether they occupy it for 6 months of a year or not. So right off the top, that's kind of one of those useless code sections for enforcement. And total occupancy maximum for both units is defined in our code. So you can only have between 2 to 5 occupants, depending on the relationship, whether it's familial or non-family related, and that is no longer allowable under law. So we simply don't apply that because we can't define what a family is for regulatory purposes. So it's in our code, and I'm hoping that's one of the things you'll let me fix. But the one thing that is okay in our code, and that is it specifically says if there's 6 or more residents in a residential structure, that is treated as a group residence. So that I believe is legal because it doesn't necessarily say whether they have to be related or not. But I'm assuming that implies if they're unregulated or they're unrelated. Yes, then it would be considered a group residence, which is a type of housing unit that is regulated under laws.
I did hear that the state is going to possibly bump that to 8. Did you hear that too? A couple people have contacted me. Our code hasn't changed yet to reflect that, but I know the state's increasing.
Yeah.
Well, what happens if a family has 8 children? Then would that be a group?
So that's a great question. I think that is just where we wouldn't necessarily apply that because it is technically a family unit. I think what our code says is if there's no familial relationship, they're unrelated to each other, and there's 8 of them living in a structure. I still have a hard time trying to figure out how I could enforce that, let alone whether it's legal to actually do that under current housing law. I think we need to fix that anyways. Accessory dwelling units require 1 additional off-street parking space. And typically when you have a single family residential, you've a 2-car garage plus a 2-car driveway. So right off the bat, you have 4 parking spaces and only 2 are required. So most units wouldn't even have to increase the amount of impervious surface or parking designated because it's already there. The code says that a single floor of an existing structure, an ADU has to be on a single floor. I don't know that makes sense because if it is above the garage, you would have to have stairs that go up to the unit, and that technically would violate that regulation because the stairs by definition are two-story stairs. So
well, that wouldn't apply to attached. It's only detached, right?
Yes, potentially, yes.
Even that might be conditional.
Yeah, although there is another regulation in here that talks about having a separate exit outside of the home. So I can't even guarantee you that that's what that intends. Also, accessory dwelling units are required to meet building, electrical, fire, plumbing, and other applicable codes. And I'm sure glad the code says that because I'm not smart enough to realize that if I wasn't told in multiple places. So that's a reminder that keeps me honest, I guess. Accessory dwelling units, there is a 300 square foot minimum and an 800 square foot maximum, excluding garage area. But it also goes on to say that it can be 40% of the primary residence in size. And that includes both the ADU and the residence. So theoretically, you could have a structure that is divided 60-40 for primary residence and ADU in the structure. Whereas a duplex, you might think of that as 50-50. So 1,000 square feet on each side of the duplex versus a 400 square foot ADU and a 600 square foot house. That would meet the 60-40 rule. But then it also goes on to say that the building official may allow for more square footage to efficiently use all floor area. And this is kind of a weird one because the building official seems like an odd person to authorize to review the planning standards and the engineering standards associated with uses. They tend to deal with structures, not uses or a design.
Your issue is not that they can use a whole floor, which I think makes sense in cases like daylight basements and such, but it's just that the building official would make that go.
Yes, yeah, so that's a quirk. And then it also goes on to say that up to 50% of existing structures can be authorized by the building official. And again, that seems like a weird code standard because I consider that to be a duplex. If half of the unit is one unit, half of the structure is another unit. Yes, yes, it ceases being an accessory dwelling unit and it really becomes a duplex. But the building official can authorize people to do duplexes, even though it requires a conditional use permit. So again, there's funky discrepancies in our code. It also goes on to say that lots smaller than 8,500 square feet can own, or smaller than 8,500 square feet means you can only have attached ADUs, and the existing ADUs, if there is one it can be replaced, but only if it's larger than 400 square feet. If it's smaller than 400 square feet, it cannot be replaced on a small lot, which is kind of seemed like totally random numbers. And then if the lot is larger than 8,501 square feet, then you can have detached or attached accessory dwelling units. So it just seems like an arbitrary line.
Do we even have any existing ADUs that are 400 square foot? Where would a specific rule?
So we may have some out there. Looking through our permit history, there's not a significant number of ADUs that have ever been approved, which is part of the reason why I think we need to fix this, because it's a cheap and easy way for us to increase density without having to do a lot of subdivisions or a lot of bureaucracy and cost. And then when we're talking about the actual physical standards for accessory dwelling units, they are required to have the same appearance as the primary structure, and they have to be compatible with surrounding single family uses. So specifically additions they have to keep the roof pitch, the siding, the windows, so that it looks consistent with the primary structure in the neighborhood. ADUs must have a separate entrance outside of the structure. Only one door may face the primary street frontage, so ADUs are supposed to you're supposed to have those accesses from the side or the rear of the structure. And then also ADUs, if it includes a new garage, that garage may not face the street. So in other words, if you have a long skinny lot and you add a garage in the backyard and you add an ADU upstairs in that garage as an accessory structure, that garage is not supposed to face the street. Because what we don't want is your neighbors look at that lot and they see, well, here's the house, here's 2, 3, 4 car garage. Plus they have a structure in the back with a giant double car garage and an apartment upstairs. The accumulation of additional garages facing the street. And that's actually a design standard that makes a lot of sense in this code. And then the last one is that the ADU must be to the rear of the residence unless it's impossible. So the idea is we want them tucked into the rear and less noticeable and less of an impact to the neighborhood.
Who determines what's possible? Oh, I just buy stuff.
Yeah, and that's a good question. And what I point out on this slide is a lot of these issues in particular, those are building permit issues. Those are not conditional use permit issues. So that's where a building official can look at the roof pitch, the siding, and the windows, and see whether it matches the house that we just did the addition to. So those don't necessarily need a hearings examiner to say, yeah, that's the same roof line, the same roof pitch, the same siding.
I'm the kind of guy that it's not prohibitive, it's impossible for me. You know what I mean? So, it's just.
So that is essentially the strange and quirky accessory dwelling unit codes that our code currently has.
Yeah, I think we can just trim a lot of fat out of there without, it's going to solve a lot of problems. Removing several of those requirements seems to be pretty straightforward.
I'm all for changing it.
So you want me to maybe go through these slides one by one and make suggestions, or do you want to go through these bullets one by one and you tell me what you like and don't like?
I
would you
have a
prefer?
question. I have an odd question. How would an ADU be addressed? Is it the same, using the same address as the main house on the same parcel with maybe a unit letter, or is it a different address?
Our code does provide for the ability to use an A and a B.
Okay. Makes
And we
sense.
have done that. Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah, I think
Those standards that I necessarily disagreed with. I don't know if everybody wants to go through line item by line item. If you put together your recommendations, we can look at it as a whole next week and say yay or nay, right? Just, unless you're lonely and you want to hang out with people for a while.
Well, so let's maybe use this slide as an example. In this case, I think our code for 1 ADU per single family structure makes sense. And I think most lots that would achieve a density of 6 units per acre on existing lots. The 1 additional parking space per ADU makes sense. And then the meet building code, fire code, that makes sense. The rest of these, single floor, occupancy limits, owner occupancy, I would just delete those outright.
Do they need to be?
Yes.
I mean, do they need to be updated to current fire code if the structure's already existing and they're?
No, that would be a call for the fire marshal, but it would not be if they're not changing the use, they would be vested.
I know sometimes people do AD for education clearance or whatever, that's you see that a lot. And they'll do an addition, they have to put in a fire, right? So they can't make the existing installation more unsafe. I mean, they don't have to go through the whole existing house. I think that's pretty much what they do. As long as you don't make it worse, right? The new addition has to meet the energy code.
most of them would be ADA compliant, which means there's going to be a lot of retrofitting anyways. And if they get into those type of situations, they would have to meet current code, but the entire structure might not have to be brought up to code.
So, I mean, I had a thought again. You know, you said just when you mentioned that, you know, one ADU per lot would get any lot to that six units per acre number. But again, like, we're not really interested in individual lots, right? We're interested in like the citywide number. And I think just the nature of, I don't know, like what people want to do, I think you're not going to get. I think ADUs are a great tool to increase our density, but I don't think you're going to get, you know, like everybody on the block wanting to do it, right? So it seems like there are going to be a handful of people that are into this, and if some of them would want to do 2 ADUs per lot, like that just gets us that much closer, right? And I think, you know, I came across this idea of a junior ADU, which is, you know, basically like it's got a few more standards than, you know, our ADU code, and basically it's, you know, if you think of an ADU, generally it's pretty small. This one's like even smaller. So I could see allowing, you know, in some instances I could see allowing 2 on a lot. You know, maybe that's more than some people are going to be comfortable with, but I think it, you know, it should be explored because, you know, I think we need, like I said, there are just going to be limited people who are going to go for this. And so to like actually have the impact that we want, giving them the most tools we can seems makes sense to me.
So maybe I should add an additional standard for at least 1 ADU up to 6 units per acre. And maybe 1 ADU would be a permitted use, or 2 or more ADUs might be a conditional use permit or a site plan maybe.
If you're gonna.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that makes sense to me.
You might already have something.
Yeah. And I think probably, you know, like it seems like more than 2 and you're getting into like cottage apartments or something, right? That seems like a different ballgame. I mean, 2 seems like they're still accessory to the main structure. More than that, and I'm not sure if we're talking about the same thing anymore.
Would you want to tie to the second ADU to a 6 units per acre density?
I wouldn't know, just because, you know, again, we're not worried about that one lot. We're worried about the whole, you know, the whole shebang, the whole zone or the whole city. So, you know, if we get pockets of really high density,
so here's
on like one lot. Sorry, go on.
So we do have the standard of 40% of the structure can be dedicated to ADU. So if you have a 4,000 square foot house, you could add 2 small ADUs and still be under that 40% standard.
That's an idea. And I would say maybe, you know, if we want to keep that standard, we could think about adjusting it up a little bit from 40%. You know, not unlimited, but maybe a little bit higher. I also think maybe that 8,500 square foot number for a detached one might also be unnecessary. That seems, again, like it's just kind of, I don't know, like it's an arbitrary number that doesn't, like, you know, the difference of 1 square foot is not gonna be that. And yeah, and like our minimum lot sizes are already pretty big, and I think there's plenty of room for, you know, an ADU on even our smallest lots. because we still have maximum coverage, right? We still have regulations there. So I think there are ways, we're already sort of addressing how much you can put on a small lot with that.
And this is the slide that talks about the square footage of the lot, and it really dictates.
And I think that also, I like, what you said about the parking. I think that's reasonable. That the parking's probably already taken care of. I guess if I had my way, we would just do away with that anyway. The parking requirement. The owner occupancy is just silly. Definitely no need for that. Total occupancy also seems silly. Like we're not, like if you've got a family of 8, we're not going to go in there and tell you you can't live there, right? So, I mean, my house, when my folks were growing up, the house I live in now they had 4 kids, they had 6 people.
So I know density is the goal here, but
I just think a lot of these I think we can just scrap.
Not too long ago that I resonated with
a lot of it.
It's like not everybody's going to want to put one of these in their backyard. Some people enjoy their yard. They bought their house in their yard for.
Anybody else have thoughts about those ideas?
Attached ADU next door to you. Is it going to be? I mean, I know as a point of clarification, I thought that you weren't in favor.
I noticed we had a couple folks join who are not staff or on the commission.
Have it attached to you, I think.
I wanted to make sure that if they want a chance to, give public comment, that they can. So I'm taking one right now. I see Joe connected via the web. Joe, if you want to give public comment, let us know. You can either just speak up now or you can send a message in the chat box. And Justin would as well. And I see a message that Brian was trying to talk, and I guess I couldn't hear him because of the microphone situation. So I'm not hearing from Justin or Joe. So Brian, talking to a microphone so I can hear you.
Yeah, I'll make a comment here, if that's okay. So I'm Justin Wood, here kind of on behalf of the Building Industry Association of Clark County. Just kind of monitoring everything with the code updates. And I just think all the ADU stuff has been a really great discussion, including the striking the owner occupancy requirement. Jurisdictions like Vancouver and Battleground have already done that.
I'm not hearing Brian at all.
Nope, just Justin.
I'm not hearing anybody at all now. Maybe it's on my.
That might be your speaker. Sorry, Justin, go ahead. Let's see if we can hear you.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Okay, yeah, everything good with the ADUs, and I really support the striking the owner occupancy requirement, as well as kind of the density standards. Regarding the duplex stuff, I think there's some room for compromise, just kind of on that corner lot. And I know with a lot of jurisdictions, including Ridgefield, that front-facing garage is kind of an issue that they deal with, and maybe having some design standards. I know they instituted kind of some architectural design standards that help kind of mitigated that front-facing garage. So that might be something to think about as well.
Al, can you hear me?
I can now, yeah, sorry. I think the problem was on my end. Sorry, I was talking over everybody.
Before just gave his comments, which I appreciate. Thank you, Justin. I was just saying for detached ADUs, I think that you should hold them to a 35-foot height limit, like maybe the house is, because as you said earlier, not everybody's going to want to do this in their backyard. And likewise, not everybody wants towering into their backyard. There might be wise to put some height limitations on the ADUs that are next to the property line.
Okay, I guess I was under the assumption that, because we do already have height limitations in all our zones, right? So I was sort of assuming that those would apply to the ATU as well, but maybe I'm mistaken about that.
And Justin, same thing here. What's your reasoning behind striking?
Just in regards to kind of housing affordability as well as increasing density. We've found just in Vancouver and some other jurisdictions that homeowners as well as renters of these ADUs can really work on kind of having agreements as well as that. And then being able to kind of rent out the primary residence. A lot of people like to, go away for longer than 6 months, especially people who are older, who have been in their homes for a while and may want that extra income. So it just creates more flexibility in housing along those lines.
All right, thank you.
And also, doesn't want to decide who's living there.
And I don't have the code in front of me, but we do have an accessory structure height limit. And if I remember correctly, it says there needs to be an additional foot of setback for every additional foot of height. I believe it's over 16.
Perfect.
So they would have, if they did a 2-story.
For an accessory structure, in general, it's 15-foot height maximum. Sorry, and yes, an additional foot of setback for each, or an additional 2 feet of setback for each additional foot of height. One of the two.
Great, thanks, Janice. Okay, so the other thing I was going to say is, Cal, you had brought up the square foot of the lot, and our code only uses that as a way to determine whether attached or detached accessory dwelling units should be allowed. I would recommend that we just ditch this standard, because if a creative architect can find a site plan and an ADU design that meets the code and meets setback, we shouldn't discriminate on the size of the lot, because a nice attractive structure,
I agree.
we should reward that design.
I think when you look at your lot coverage, that's going to limit it also. It still falls under your 50% lot coverage.
Yeah, and that's, I think maybe we'll tackle that one someday too, but I think that makes a lot of sense.
And then I think this slide gets to the last of the issues that you had brought up, Tel, and that is percentages and minimum maximum lot size. I don't know whether.
So I could see a second ADU maybe having some, having that 300 to 800 square foot, or maybe like even a 500 square foot maximum, and say anything lower than that is fine. But if it's just one, like, I don't think we need to have that in addition to this 40 or 50%. That seems a little, I don't know, redundant and constraining.
And so you're talking about the percentage of the primary residence would still be applicable, but no minimum or maximum if it's a single ADU.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah. And I would say, I guess the junior ADU standards I have seen typically will have a maximum. It's pretty small, like 500 square feet. So like it makes sense if in that situation to me to have you know, if you're wanting to fit more than one of these things on property. But yeah, I think our percentages kind of cover that issue otherwise.
Okay, and so the last one is, these are the ADUs. I pulled these from a couple sections, but these are the kind of the physical development standards. And I actually wouldn't make any recommendations on changing any of these. The same appearance as the primary structure, compatible with surrounding uses, same pitch siding windows, separate entrance, one garage door facing the street, new garages not face the street and to the rear of the residence. Those all seem like they are timeless, even though our code is out of date.
Sorry, go on.
Brian just said he agreed.
Ah, all right, great. Yeah, I'm having more audio trouble than I ever had before. Sorry about that. The only one door facing the primary street frontage, is that a garage door or is that a man door?
Good question.
I was assuming that was the man door. But...
Yeah, I assume that was people door.
Okay. So that, yeah, I mean, I don't know. That's the only one that I would have on here. That's the only one that I would have an objection to. Maybe I guess the separate entrance also maybe seems a little silly. You know, I think probably most people would want a separate entrance anyway. But I could see, you know, for like, let's say somebody's got a garage that's, you know, got a long driveway, and I've seen, you know, when I was biking around Portland, I've seen some like this where it's you know, it's a converted detached garage. The door still faces the street, but it's way back from the street, so it's not. I mean, you're not gonna like see it or interact with it really. I don't know. So it seems like that one doesn't seem real important to me.
Would the answer to be visible from the street?
I guess. I mean, I guess it comes down to like, what are we really worried about? Like, what's the problem that we're trying to solve with not wanting to see more than one door? And I don't like. Maybe I just don't. Maybe it's just something I don't understand. But like, I'm having a hard time.
I think there's a history of certain ADUs, perhaps in single-family dwellings, where there is another, I guess, habitable unit in that single-family dwelling with its own living space, and so it's almost like a separate house, but it's attached. Therefore, they think they would call it an ADU, but it's not an ADU because there isn't it doesn't have its own separate entrance. So anyone can convert their single-family dwelling and put in like an apartment inside their house and say, oh, it's an ADU, when I think that's why there's that ADU must have a separate entrance on that standard.
Yeah, and I guess I'm not sure what that, like, why the one seems better than the other, right? Like if it's complying with every, you know, all our other standards that we've got, why do we want it to have a separate entrance? You know, especially if, so those two together, I guess, seem kind of weird. Like maybe just ditch one or the other. Maybe you don't have to ditch both of them. Like, you know, if you don't have to have a separate entrance, then it doesn't really matter, because you know, you can have only one door facing the primary street frontage, right? And it's just a shared entrance. Or if you know, if you don't have to, you can have, I don't know. Anyway, I'm tripping over myself now, but I guess I'm just not sure why. I mean, I guess I've seen, so, you know, I visited a friend in Denver, and there was I mean, it was a converted house. It had been converted into apartments, but it had one entrance, and then there were, you know, 3 doors inside a little foyer, right? And I don't know, that seems okay to me. That seems to be accomplishing the goal of our ADUs and doesn't seem to, if the idea is that you don't want to, somebody doesn't want to see more than one door on the front of a building for some reason, which that's confusing.
In that scenario, you're still complying with that standard, right? You walk into a vestibule or something and you have 3 doors in there that still have separate entrances. You're still complying with it. Even though you all share the main exit to the outdoor, if you have 3 entries inside a vestibule, you're still complying.
Okay, would those be considered, okay, I guess I wasn't understanding that. I was assuming that it would be separate entrances to the building.
That's an interesting interpretation I hadn't thought of, but yeah, now that you mention it, that is exactly how I would interpret that, yeah.
Okay.
For me looking at this, it seems it's interesting because say I put an accessory dwelling unit in my home for my mother-in-law or whomever, I'm not going to be living there forever. I'll be moving out. Essentially, we're creating, I'm not saying it's wrong. I think it's a kind of a neat idea, but apartments of sorts. I have a home with another quarters that somebody that will end up being rented out, right? I mean, long term, that's what we're allowing. Call it whatever it is, but I'm good with that.
Yeah, to some degree, and that's I think.
Yeah, and if you own it, you do what you want with that house.
And I think there's a long history of that, right? Like the mother-in-law unit, like that was like for all of history, people put separate dwellings either in the same building or on the same property. Like this, even though it's got a new name, ADU it makes it sound like something. This is not a new idea. This is as old as cities.
Right.
So yeah, I mean that's one way to talk about it.
Every college town in the country, that's all you'll see.
Right. Yeah.
So the one thing that I didn't put in the slide that occurred to me during this conversation, and that is we talk about attached and detached, but really I think the looming question, because the building code is starting to regulate tiny homes and define tiny homes, do you think we should add any language to our ADUs that a detached ADU could be a park model or a tiny home? Would that be an acceptable?
You could, but it might be more difficult to match architectural stuff with a park model. Right? It's probably going to be easier to stick build that. Because if you have design standards that you have to hold to.
Matters how much you live in the city.
That's a good question. This is an interesting one. I know.
But if it's a legally inspected, HUD inspected unit for fire life safety, why not? I mean, it's just going to be difficult to get a park model that matches.
Yeah, look, I'm in that business.
Right.
Oddly enough, some of these new tiny homes, they might look better than the existing structure.
I think that's absolutely true.
Or
the existing structure, you'd have to upgrade, not the tiny.
Or containers. Do you think we don't want to touch that right now?
Containers. It's like
container homes.
Shipping containers.
Shipping container home.
Well, if the home was a shipping container, then of course the ADU could be.
I think if it, I think maybe we just don't address it. We say like if it meets the other standards, then you can use it, right? Like if it meets all our building standards and looks something like the other house, then sure, make it out of a container if you want.
And I only bring that up at the end because that's probably something where we need to have open houses and a bunch of people in the room talking about this, the pros and cons, and it might be a little.
You just say it's okay.
Well, you have to have the door of the shipping container openable from the inside.
That's important. That's an important detail.
Sorry, I'm sorry, my mic was muted.
We could hear you. Well, I could hear you a little bit from the other microphone, so it was okay. Yeah, I don't know. And a situation, yeah, if an open house, inviting somebody like Is it Justin? Yeah, somebody like Justin, who probably has some media to show off. Could probably be pretty helpful to settle people down a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I don't have any like particular objection to either of those if they're, if they don't look like trash, right? They seem fine.
Okay, so that covers everything that I wanted to cover. Is there anything you want to give me input before next month, or you want me to discuss for next month?
Nothing further, Your Honor.
So the one thing, I just had a couple real quick things. I saw that you mentioned that flexible lot widths won't increase density. And I think that is true, even though we're also like considering some other things that wouldn't necessarily increase density. And I think one advantage of that is it's not necessarily density, but it is good for street utilization to allow narrower lots. If you can fit more lots on a street, you need less street per person. Even if the lots remain the same size, if it makes them deeper, that makes the roads further apart, and so you need less of them. So I think that might still be worth pursuing, just from sort of a fiscal responsibility standpoint. And then I think I mentioned this briefly, but yeah, just the minimum of six units per acre for HDR seems kind of low to me. I think we could go up from 6, especially if we're going to use that for herd numbers for any development and MDR. I think increasing it, the same as our sort of equivalent to the maximum or close to that anyway. So 8.4 would be the same, would meet the same ratio as 25 to 35, which is the maximum for MDR and HDR. And I think up or down from that would be fine. 8 would be fine, 9 would be fine. Just seems like it should just be bigger. Because like you said, we just don't have that much high density residential, and it would be a shame to let it get eaten up with something that's not high density. Oh, the other thing I was right. So your little your table that showed what was allowed or accessory permitted or conditional use.
Yep.
Repeat that again. Okay. Okay, so I guess so I'm looking at for multifamily, the 2 multifamily zones and the multifamily dwellings, including duplexes, apartments. So I guess I see a gap between duplexes and multifamily dwellings. Maybe it's not a huge gap. It's maybe just 3-plex and 4-plex. Are those actually permitted, and I'm just reading the table wrong?
So they would be permitted with a planned unit residential development, but you could not do just a flat out 4-plex on an MDR lot.
I think we should change that.
Okay.
I think, yeah, especially on HDR. Yeah, definitely. I think on both of those. If we're talking multifamily, I think those need to be permitted.
Do you have some sort of base area requirement to be a bird?
Yeah, it's 2 acres.
2 acres, okay.
And that's huge, quite honestly. Like that limits it to at the edge of town, which is, like not necessarily a bad place to be building denser, but not the ideal place.
I agree with Cal. I'm okay with it. Expanded house choice.
Yeah, it just seems like, that's, if multifamily, if apartments, if all those are permitted, it just doesn't make sense to skip the intermediate, those two intermediate options.
So should I add 3-plex, 4-plex, 6-plex stacked apartments? Really, I should probably add all of those.
I would like that. Yeah, for sure. That makes a lot of sense to me. Especially makes sense because our minimum lot size there is bigger than two of our low density residential zones, right? So I would even consider making single family dwellings in multifamily a conditional use. Just because, that's, yeah, seems to be contrary to their comp plan designation and their zoning designation.
Did you say something earlier that you wanted to establish a minimum density to prevent that? Or was that in the?
So
I thought.
yes, so I proposed 6 unit per acre minimum, and TEL had recommended going to 8 minimum. And conditional use permit for multifamily would not be inconsistent with either one of those.
Okay. Yeah, because that, even if it's for the whole development, if we're putting a single family house on a, in multifamily, that just doesn't make sense. I'm not saying we need to like outright, disallow it, but it seems like that's not it seems like an accessory kind of use for that.
You're only talking about single family as in on their own lot, right?
Yeah, detached single family in the multifamily zones.
Because if it's on a lot with a bunch of other ones, it's not a single family. You know what I mean?
Right.
The underlying ground with an apartment complex, it's just another unit.
Right.
Albeit a large out of place unit.
I guess as I'm looking at this, the one other thought that comes to mind is, we've got minimum lot sizes. I think maybe considering maximum lot sizes might be worthwhile, and maybe that's in the context of, again, triggering a conditional use. So not saying you can't, but saying you gotta have some reason for it. Just so that we're not squandering, using up all our land. And maybe that number is like, I don't know, like 3 times the size of our minimum or something. I don't know. It doesn't have to be. We don't need to like seriously constrain people too much, but I think having some number there makes sense to me. Although I guess if we have a well, I don't know. Anybody have thoughts about that? Freaking anyone out?
Maybe if it was tied to achieving density, if they can achieve density but still have a larger remainder lot, that might be okay.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I guess, and it's funny, because I think this is. I keep going back and forth between thinking about, like most of the use of this code, right, is going to be new development, but my mind's kind of in infill, right? So when I'm thinking about these things, I'm thinking about, in town instead of greenfield development. But yeah, for a new big subdivision, that makes sense. I think that's yeah. I think those were the thoughts I had written down. So.
So Travis, what else do you have on the agenda?
That's it.
That's it?
Yep.
All right.
So we do have, Melissa could potentially talk about some data work she's done, but she's just started diving into it. And
I'm okay waiting for the finished product.
Somebody wants to get home.
Yeah, I think we can hold off on the dive into the data until next time. I could give a staff report update on current projects.
Yeah, sure. I'd like to hear that real quick. And just like the data, is this housing stuff data that you're looking at, or is this totally unrelated? Yeah.
Housing.
Great. Okay.
Okay, so recent buildings and also certificates of occupancy that have been issued are for Popeyes. They're open for business on Belmont Loop. Antidote Tap House is opened on 1350 Atlantic. Red Leaf Coffee on Dike Access. We've got Arco AM/PM and the Car Wash open on 1990 Sherman Way. Burris Creek Mini Storage is opening up. They have a few of their storage facilities now finalized. And then we have building currently going on at 438 CC Street and 437 Washington Street. There are two short flats back to back, and the houses are starting to go in there.
I'm also getting ready to issue another permit for one of those short plat lots. It just got approved today, so I'll be issuing it Tuesday.
Great, thank you, Janice. We have a new site plan review for where the Kirkland Senior Living Center was going to go, or was proposed to go. And they are now proposing to put in business storage units. So they'll be specifically for businesses and also worker space as well. Let's see, Atlas Plumbing has applied and been approved to expand their lot. They're at 428 North Pekin Road, and they'll be adding in a new building there. Woodland Creek Subdivision had their pre-con today for grading, so they're coming along. And you'll see soon a new coffee stand on Atlantic. It's going to go where the Rooster Coffee was, but River's Edge is going to be coming in their place. Then Belmont RV, we had the hearing with the hearing examiner, I think it was about 2 weeks ago. The hearing examiner kept the record open. So there's a week for the public to give more comments, and the applicant responded with revised plans. Following that week, staff submitted a supplemental staff report adding in some conditions in response to community comment. And then that will be open for one more week. The applicant has 1 week to respond to the comments and the supplemental staff report. After that, the hearing examiner will issue a decision. It will be about 10 days afterward, between 1 week and 2 weeks. Then there are two pre-apps we've had recently, one for Astro. They're moving their fueling canopy, proposing to, on Hoffman and Park. And Columbia Precast is proposing an expanded laydown yard on Guild Road. I wanted to let you know that our notices of application and notices of decisions, we post those all online on the city website, and in addition to the email routing. So it's a link from the homepage that says announcements, notices, RFPs, and I've sent the link in the email. So if you ever want to check in between planning commission meetings and see other projects as they're posted, you can find them there. Do you have any questions about those projects I just went through? Want to hear any more?
I guess I'm a little curious about Astros. Where are they moving the cover? It's expanding it?
It's a reconfiguration of the lot, and they have gained, I think it was 5 feet through a boundary line adjustment. Is that right, Travis?
25 feet.
Oh, 25 feet. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Cool. Well, it sounds like there's some action in town, so that's fun. All right. Well, I guess
the mic is on.
I guess we should maybe start wrapping it up then. I want to check to make sure that nobody's got any other comments before we go. So does anybody else have something to say?
Nope.
All right, great.
No,
Well,
I'm
thanks
good.
everybody. That was it went pretty smoothly, I think. So thanks again for taking time out of your week. And
Brian, I second that.
all right. Okay, we'll adjourn then. 9 o'clock. Great to see everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
See you next time.